Hello, everyone. I am Corey Andrew Powell, and I am really thrilled today to be joined by Jothy Rosenberg. Now, Jothy has a PhD in computer science from Duke University, where he's remained a CS professor for 5 years. He's the founder of 9 high-tech startups as well in areas ranging from parallel supercomputers to internet security with some internet infrastructure, television streaming processors, and special effects equipment and startups in between as well. His personal story is one that is very harrowing, but also inspirational and aspirational. And I'm just happy he's here today. So, Jothy, welcome to Motivational Mondays.
Thank you so much, Corey. I'm glad to be here. I've liked your podcast, and I'm honored actually to be on one that's this popular.
Oh my goodness. Well, that is I'm honored. That's a great compliment. So, excuse me. Thank you so much. I try to bring really tangible conversations that people can use, not just a bunch of Q&A and, without really something that's tangible. So, what I would love to talk to you about first and foremost is your personal story. I just know that a big part of that is, as you say, I guess 43-year amputee from being a cancer survivor. So, can you talk a little bit about when cancer impacted your life? I mean, you would have been really young at that stage, correct?
I was 16. Actually, it's been 50. The math was not right in my notes. It's
Mm,
51 years
mm,
as an amputee. 51 years ago since I was 16, and we got the diagnosis of cancer, which didn't happen, of course, instantly.
mm,
It was bone cancer, and so unbeknownst to anyone, it's sort of making the bone in the knee on the upper side of the knee, the femur, start
mm,
to disintegrate, and things would happen like I'd be jumping rope in midair when my knee was still bent, it wouldn't unbend, it wouldn't
mm.
straighten, and I would fall on ground, which would hurt like just you wouldn't imagine.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
hurt so much. And they would call my dad, and he was a surgeon, and he would come and he would say, and you know how doctors are with their kids, they they think they can treat them and not take them to the doctor, right?
Oh, okay.
And he would say, big guys hurt their knees a lot, so just why don't you take it easy? I'm going to wrap it in ace bandage, and maybe if you take it easy, it'll get a little bit better. Now, when was the last time you told a 16-year-old to take it easy and they did?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's,
So,
yeah. So go ahead, please.
well, then of course, my older brother thought he could take advantage of this, so he would punch me and run, and of course, I had to try to catch him, and so I could like pounce on him, and in the process of trying, I would hurt it again, and
Mm,
my dad would say, "Hey, come on, take it easy." Anyway, he finally did take me in after 3 times of hurting it, and
mhm.
um, and then they decided something was not right. They did a biopsy, and then that leg had to be amputated the next morning in an emergency because it gets into the bloodstream.
Mm. I can't even imagine being 16 years old and being told that. I mean, what is that like at 16 to be told that the next day we have to remove your leg?
Well, the thing is that they are immediately putting you into just a whole bunch of things. They're, shaving the hair, and they're prepping you. And so, there's a whirlwind of activity going on. So I didn't yet get a chance to think about it.
Hmm.
That came after, it wasn't until after because, they already gave me drugs to have me sleep because they knew that I would be freaking out.
Yeah,
So
sure.
I was sort of sedated. I shouldn't say I was drugged. I was sedated.
Hmm.
And then 7 in the morning off to surgery. And I wake up in the ICU, and all I hear are the very quiet whirring of all the machines, and the nurses are, you know, going around me, and I look down and there's just a bandaged stump where my leg used to be.
Mm. Wow.
And then I had to deal with just, months of excruciating pain. Um, and first they used fake narcotics because those were the days when they thought they couldn't give you narcotics in even for serious pain. And the
Mm.
truth is, well, that's actually what narcotics are actually good at, dealing with
Right.
real
Yeah.
pain.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, um,
Wow.
but I gotta say, Corey, that the first phase of this whole story was about everybody telling me you can't do this, you can't do that, while I was even still in the hospital. And I hadn't yet can't come up with my sort of trademark phrase, which,
Yeah. Who
as
says I
you know,
can't?
is who says I can't.
Yes.
But
Yes.
but um but all I was hearing was can't. And I mean, you're already, you've been whacked, and then everybody is kind of furthering it and beating it into you that, my favorite sport as at that age was skiing. I had already skied since I was 5. I was good. And then they said, well, you can't ski on one ski, of course. So, forget it.
Mm.
And then oh, well, you can't swim because you go in circles, which is the dumbest thing.
Silly. Yeah.
Um,
Ridiculous.
uh, but the but now flash forward just a little bit, because then when I was 19, and so you need to understand, the first thing happened in 1973. Chemotherapy had not yet been developed.
Mm.
And so they were just hoping that it hadn't gotten into the bloodstream, because that's what this cancer does. And so I had to have these checkups every 6 months, a blood test and a chest x-ray, because where this cancer will go, if it is in the bloodstream, is it'll deposit itself in the lung.
Mm.
And after 3 years, and I thought I was just doing these checkups just to, placate my parents. I didn't actually think that it was possible. I'm 19, and you think you're immortal at 19, right? Nothing can hurt me, man. I
Hmm.
mean, and I even thought that, even though something had happened to me, to
You
show.
still believe that? Yeah.
and and then I get the checkup, and it says you're not going home. You're getting readmitted to the hospital. You have to have your lung removed tomorrow morning.
My goodness.
And that's
Wow.
when it's really bad, because now you realize, okay, that wasn't a fluke. It really is in me. And is it done with me?
Mm.
And and then, then they did have chemo, and they put me on that. So now you're dealing with that. Your hair falls out, and you go back to school after that. And you know, um, the chemo is a long process. It's, for me, it was, um, let's see, it was 5 days of injections, and then you get a 3-week break, because your body has just been decimated by that, and you're sick all that time. Luckily, I went to one of these small colleges that was great about working around my chemo. Oh, the other cool thing was, sort of cool, is that this was decades before the concept of medical marijuana, right? But I had an enlightened oncologist who noticed the obvious, that I was getting really sick, nauseous and throwing up and stuff, even before the needle would hit my skin, because their body is just getting such a strong reaction. And he said, "Listen, do you know what THC is?" And I hadn't had an adult ask me that question, and I was very suspicious. "Why are you asking?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I can't help you with this, but if you have a source that could get you this in any form, take it before you come in for the next injection." I said, "Okay." So I had a friend make me a big fat joint, and I smoked it. And I went in, and like, it used to be that I would go in, and the rug in the doctor's office would set me off. I mean, it
Mm.
was such a strong connection.
Yeah. Trauma.
And I used to call the nurses, I said, "Hey, these are my throw up nurses," because they were about to make me throw up. And they saw me all happy, and I wasn't, like, nervous this time. And they did the injection, and I still wasn't getting sick, and they couldn't understand what was going on.
Mm.
And 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 I was one of the earliest people probably that saw the amazing effect
Yes.
of marijuana.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, of course, today that is one of the main ways in which they help people navigate that whole situation of the chemo, of the nauseousness, of the loss of appetite because it increases appetite. So, yeah, I mean, that's amazing that you were sort of on that journey. And now, I mean, my goodness, it's a publicly traded product on the stock exchange. I mean, that's how far we've come to
I
something,
know,
it's
a
pretty
long time
fascinating.
coming too.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, I when in college, it just made me eat enormously and I don't need any help getting fat, so I don't partake. I'm good. But I'm happy that it helps other people. Um
For me, it's funny because now I don't want to partake in using it recreationally because in my mind it is a medicine, a drug
yeah, yeah.
that has a purpose. And so, I don't partake either.
Yeah. And it's also fascinating that there's this strange dichotomy of resistance in this country specifically when we know there's medical benefits to it. And you still have, I think it's like 27 or 28 states where it's legal, and then some states where it's kind of legal. And then you don't know, well, if I have it in this state and I cross the line, am I going to go to prison if I cross the Mason-Dixon or something? It's just we need to really, I think, get it together in this country with it being a we're all on the same page, if you will. But I don't want to go
Yeah.
into a tangent being an advocate for marijuana because this is a family show, by the way.
Yeah.
No,
Well, yeah, understood.
no, I'm just kidding. But no, it's an adult topic, and so I think hopefully we can get that together. But more importantly, I want to talk to you about your TED Talk because it really just supports what you just were discussing about who says I can't. And I love how you had other people who had endured physical adversities in their lives, from the woman who went over I think the ocean floor, the seawall, I think she was talking about, and then the hikers who had gone into like the wilderness side of the
Mount
mountain, and
Washington.
they and just yeah, exactly in Washington. Just the adversity that was overcome by people who had these really extraordinary circumstances. And so I love that that's really a lesson for all of us to learn from. But you bring up a point about people who have potentially physical disabilities. They think differently when they face adversity, which maybe gives them more of an advantage than able-bodied people. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's interesting because if you look around, you'll see an incredible number of people who have some form of a disability that have overachieved. And they studied this really carefully among polio survivors. We all know Franklin Roosevelt had polio, and he was, obviously a superstar. But Jack Nicklaus, Alan Alda, Joni Mitchell,
Hmm.
these are all people that had polio, and then look what they, accomplished. And the people that I had three people, and you mentioned them in that TED Talk. And Maureen was the one who tripped over a rope and fell down like 13 feet, landed and broke her back and never walked again. But, and all of us have the same moment where we need something that can help us rebuild our self-esteem. That's baseline. If humans don't have good self-esteem, you can't live a healthy life. It's actually a serious threat to your mental health.
Hmm.
And and what I discovered, and the people that I highlighted there discovered, is sports is one really good way because somebody with a disability can find a way to adapt to the sport they love, and then they are more than willing to work super hard at getting good at it. And when they do, they feel this major sense of accomplishment. And what I said in the TED Talk is a theory I've developed over a long period of time, which is that there's three traits which people who've gotten a physical disability tend to naturally have. And with these three traits together, which I'll describe just in a second, they have the ability to overachieve, to overachieve, their able-bodied or I like to say temporarily able-bodied, compatriots. And those three traits are, I'll just say what they are and I'll describe what I mean by them first. So insecurity, exceptionalism, and discipline.
Hmm.
So if you have a disability, you are going to feel this sense of insecurity. I'll give you an example. Um, I don't wear my prosthetic leg all the time. When I get up in the middle of the night and have to go to the bathroom, I have to find my crutches. That gentleman who lost both of his legs below the knees in that accident on the mountain, well, he doesn't want to put his legs on in the middle of the night either. He crawls to the bathroom. Okay, so you're reminded every day. There's no like, oh, I've permanently overcome this disability. No, you are reminded every day. And so it builds into you. I call it insecurity, but it's also the opposite of hubris. You're not going to be arrogant if you have, a physical disability. So there's insecurity. But then what happens is you start to figure out this is something I really want to do. And so I'm going to figure out how I can do it. So for me, with skiing, it was, oh, get these poles, which we call outriggers, which have little ski tips on the end, and they're going to enable me to, if I start leaning, I could put that down real quick, 2 seconds, 1 second, and I'm not going to fall, and I get to keep going, and eventually you get better and better and better. So we learn to set small achievable goals, but lots of them. And you achieve one, celebrate it, and then set the next one and keep going. And
Mhm.
as you do, you start to feel exceptional. You feel like, wow, I've just really accomplished something significant. It certainly is significant given my situation, but it eventually becomes just really significant. I mean, there's nothing I love more than when there's a bunch of people perched at the top of a ski run and they're contemplating going down it, and I just go right through the middle of them
Yeah.
and go down. I mean, I love that. Okay, so but then you think, well, wait a minute, how can you have exceptionalism and insecurity? Well, they seem like they're opposite traits, but you put them together, and that's what creates drive. It's like, well, how am I going to get, sort of so I don't feel that sense of insecurity all the time. Well, when you're skiing down the mountain really well, at that particular time, you're not feeling insecure.
Hmm. Wow.
And and then the third thing is discipline. And that's just really all about um, focus, hard work, sticking to it. You know, it's kind of where, I talk about in my startup world, I talk about grit. We always say startup people have grit. Well,
Hmm.
people with disabilities have grit. These two worlds that I operate in are linked.
Yeah.
They're linked through grit.
When you say that too, it reminds me so much of my own observations where, for example, a dear friend of mine, Michelle Taylor, who I will say hello to in this podcast, she is a manager of jazz artists. And her most, I would say, prominent client is an artist who was a child prodigy named Matthew Whitaker. He's a pianist, keyboardist, and just an amazing music conductor and all these things. A young man now, but he was a child. And when he first began, I mean, just can play. He's just amazing, blind. And I have a nice Yamaha piano that I'm proud of, and I'm still playing chopsticks after like 4 years with full vision, you know? And so I always go, it's fascinating to me that people, or even I know of a guy who skis with one leg. I'm terrified to even get on the slopes with two. It's all those things. And I think you're right. It does make people uh, who have an innate desire to persevere and still have a full life after a devastating situation. That I think is what drives them. Like in your case, it's the who says I can't. And I just think that's a fascinating thing. That's what made you say when they told you you couldn't ski again. And plus you're 16 or, young. You're like, no, I'm gonna do it probably. You just have to
Well, it took a
figure out
while.
how.
Yes, I did. And it wasn't like they said this to me when I was in the hospital and I fought back. I listened to it and thought, well, that's really depressing.
Mm.
But I still had it in me. So the surgery was in January. And in March, I wasn't even fully healed, but I insisted my parents take me out to a small little mountain. We lived in a suburb of Detroit, and the mountains there are like, well, the hills there were actually trash heaps first. And I said, you got to take me out. I got to try this. And they didn't have those outrigger things. I just had to use normal pointy poles.
Mm.
And the funny thing about skiing is that you when you're on your left ski, that you're supposed to turn right with that left ski, and then it's supposed to be the right ski that helps you turn left. Well, I only had the left, so basically what would happen is I would try to turn to the right and it would feel normal, and I would go, oh, that's awesome. As soon as I tried the other way, bam, fell.
Yeah, yeah.
And and so my parents are watching this and they're saying, "Oh, this was a horrible mistake. He's going to be absolutely humiliated and devastated. We made a mistake." And at the end, they said, "Well, what do you think?" And I said, "I got this,"
Yeah, yeah.
because I knew that, okay, I have an issue. It's the left turn. I'm going to have to figure that out. And I'm going to work my you know what off until I do. It took a long time. I actually had to wait until I was done with the chemo. And then I said, well, look, I think this stuff is still in my bloodstream. So I'm probably going to be a goner. So I got to go do what I want to do. So I
Mhm.
didn't even ask permission from my parents. I said, I'm driving to Utah from Detroit, and I'm going to be a ski bum. And I get out there and I get a job in a lodge, um, washing pots and pans. So it was the evening job. So I had all day to ski. And I got a free room and board, a season's pass, and $100 a month spending money, which I
Wow.
spent beer and foosball. And, and I skied every day for 100 days straight. And let me
Mm.
tell you, at the end of that, you couldn't tell the difference between my right turn and my left turn.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man. I love that. And you know what's great too is that story is very synonymous with when I talk to successful people on this show, from all backgrounds, all walks of life, mostly able-bodied people. I've had some amazing guests as well. Or I guess fully able-bodied is, I guess, is the terminology. Which is a weird terminology. We'll get into that as well. But I've had this underlining denominator of people who have done well in life in the face of adversity are the ones who are able to adapt and change and make a pivot, not get stuck. And that's why I think it's a great parallel between people who don't have disabilities and people who do. I mean, that's that one differentiator. If you decide you are not going to get stuck and how am I going to adapt and pivot, that is how you can hopefully thrive and prosper versus just maybe just dying and not going anywhere, dying inside, I think, from not trying to go further. So that's a common denominator I see between all people, regardless of their backgrounds. You
I
know?
think I always thought that you, when something really challenging happens to you, and it's way beyond just something physical. It could be a bad breakup from a relationship, or a death of a loved one. And at that moment, you're sitting on the peak of this roof, and you can go one direction or the other, and it's up to you. And one direction is bad. You're going to be depressed, and you're going to have, you're going to, sort of wallow in your negativity.
Hmm.
And the other way is, okay, this bad thing happened and I have to move forward. I have to deal with it.
Yeah.
And and that's certainly how I viewed my situation, that if I let all these people saying can't to me get to me, well then, I was going to go down the roof the wrong direction.
Mm.
And I had to just find little tiny things to succeed at, to break out of what they weren't trying, but they were doing to me with
Mm.
their negativity.
Right. Yeah. They were projecting what, and it very often is what people themselves would do in a situation that they're projecting onto you. And that's still, no matter what the situation, that's just what people do. When I wanted to move or go to New York, I got, oh, I wouldn't do that. That's dangerous. They're gonna kill you. I watch Law and Order. It's dangerous, you know. And I'm like, no, okay, but that's not what I would do. Like, I'm going to New York. And so, but other people will get into your head. And one of my favorite guests actually on Motivational Mondays is a girl who was born with cerebral palsy. Her name is Chelsea Bear. And she became a really big social media influencer because she noticed how people would be really nervous and uncomfortable as she tried to do her day-to-day activities, whether it be go to get coffee or whatever it was. And so she began to chronicle herself just going to Starbucks. Like, hey, I might look a little different when I get my coffee, but I get my coffee. And don't tell your kids not to look at me. Don't pull them away like I'm a social pariah. I would be happy to tell them why my body moves this way. And her thing was, let's sort of like demystify physical disabilities because at one point, through sickness or maybe even natural causes, most of us will experience it. And
Well,
at
don't
one
forget
point,
age. We
and
all
age.
age.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, just natural progression, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, you you still get stared at, even and when I was younger, it bothered me a lot. And as I've gotten older, it bothers me a lot less. I mean, I used to, you wouldn't catch me dead, not going to a restaurant without my leg on.
Hmm.
Now it's like, no, I want to be comfortable. I'm
Yeah.
going on crutches.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But still, when and one of my major forms of exercise is swimming. Um, and I'll go to the pool, and little kids will stare, just and they and they'll yell to their mother across the pool, "Hey, that man has only one leg," and
Yeah.
and I'll
Kids.
and I'll say to the kid, "Yeah, but it didn't affect my hearing. I can hear
Right.
you."
Right.
And and what I try to say to kids, um, is, maybe you want to ask me a question. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Yeah.
And I've gotten really kind of hooked on this, trying to help younger kids um, understand this kind of thing earlier, right? And
Yes.
so I actually wrote this children's book called Adventures on the Can-Do Trail,
Mhm.
and in it, it's for 4 to 9 year olds, and I'm trying to get that age kid through this book, where it's about animals that have a physical challenge, and then a human boy sees their situation and helps them adapt to whatever it is that is holding them back, and then they accomplished it. They accomplished something. And so on the first page, they're saying, and their friends are saying, you can't. The giraffe is born with stunted legs, and his parents and everyone is saying, oh, you can't reach the leaves on the tree. How are you going to survive? And Alex, the boy, says, oh, I know what to do, and makes him stilts.
Mm.
And he can, and longer and longer stilts, and eventually he can reach the leaves, the tops of the trees, and everybody's saying, well, he's saying mostly, who says I can't reach the
Right.
leaves at the tops of the
Hmm.
trees?
That's
And the
great.
kids who get this book read to them, at the a couple times after having it read to them, and then one of the parents says can't at the dinner table, and the kid will say, we don't say can't anymore. And
Mm.
it really
It's a
works.
bad
It really
word.
gets, yeah, it's a bad word.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, I think it's really great that that's the whole point that Chelsea wants to get across as well. It's that young age because she thinks that by starting off with that demographic, we are sort of resetting or recalibrating society because as they grow up, they're growing up with a very different relationship between people who have disabilities and all the different body types and things that we all have and that to contend with. And I do want to ask you, I know we spent so much time on your pre-story about, your cancer and how you've thrived after that. But I do want to talk about your entrepreneurship, which is like out of this world with these amazing high-tech startups. So what was the transition like from, hey, I'm going to be this ski bum guy, have a good time with, foosball and beer,
Right.
to starting 9 really successful high tech startups?
Well, believe it or not, so the reason that I went, in sort of such a determined way to go ski was that same oncologist who said, do you know what THC is, had also said something a little more impactful actually on my brain. He said, because he had no experience with chemo, but he was going to put me on it as a precaution, covering his bases. He said to this 19-year-old, no one has ever survived when this happens. What he was right. When the cancer back then in 1973, if that cancer called osteosarcoma spread to your lung, the
Mm.
survival rate was zero.
Wow.
But but I'm not sure he should have said that. What my brain heard was, you are going to die.
Mm.
19-year-old brain heard that. So I did the ski bump thing. What I didn't anticipate, because I was kind of focused on something else, was that, oh, what if I'm still alive when the snow melts? And that's what I was. I was still alive and the snow melted.
Right.
Couldn't think of anything better to do than to go finish college. And then, um, I people were saying to me, "What are you going to do now?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I still thought that I might not be around for long.
Mm.
So I didn't really feel like getting a job. I kind of liked school, so I applied to graduate school. And then when I was in graduate school, people said, "Well, you don't even want to try for the PhD. No, that's like so few people can do that." I said, "That's for me." I mean, I hate to say this, Corey, but the main reason I got a PhD was that people said you can't.
Who says I can't? Right. I mean, that's it. That you're living that brand, like seriously.
So I finished my PhD in computer science at Duke, and I was on the faculty
My gosh.
and for 5 years. And but I started working on something that just, I don't know, it was for the military. It was, no, it's for NASA. It was building a space flyable single board, but a big board supercomputer that was going to go on board the space shuttle.
Mm.
And
Wow.
and it was cool. And I thought, well, if this is good for that, why is this not going to be good for like the normal world? How could I do something to make that happen? And I started to talk to people and investigate. And it was pretty clear that in Durham, North Carolina, in those days, that wasn't a place to do a startup. And
Mm.
I had two choices, Boston or Silicon Valley. And my wife said, I want you to check Boston out first because California is going to fall into the ocean any day. So I did check out Boston, and it's funny that I've ended up in Boston. That's where I am now. But
Mm.
but so I checked it out, and the opportunity looked better in California, and so we went, and first startup was in Sunnyvale, California. But then right after that, um, I got a job in between startups, and they moved me to Boston, and we've been here 28 years and 8 more startups since
Mm.
that one. And they've been, like you said at the beginning, in all kinds of different areas. Um, but what happened is that it became like almost like an addiction. It was the control over your own destiny, the fast pace, the ability to make decisions, impactful decisions without analysis paralysis, and just keep moving fast.
Mm.
And um, part of the part of one of the there were two phenomena that stuck with me for a really long time. One was um, really a risk taker. I did a lot of things that were really risky, including startups. Um, and and luckily, once I started to have a family, I got to be better about that and not taking such
Right.
such
Right.
physical risks. Uh, and the other was that it was very hard to shake the idea that I wasn't going to die any day now, and that lasted about 25 years.
Mm.
And
Wow.
all that time, I was very impatient with everything. I wanted everything to go fast, fast,
Yeah.
fast.
Yeah.
And so the risk and the fast were very consistent with startups. And I had, a couple of successes. I mean, with the total of nine, and you've probably heard this, and many of your listeners will have heard that 8 out of 10 startups fail, which is actually a true statistic. And so I've got nine. We don't know what's going to happen with this ninth one yet, but out of the 8 previous ones, two had decent success. The
Mhm.
others were, some of them I describe as we hit the wall with no skid marks, you
Wow.
know?
Yeah.
Uh,
That's fascinating.
uh, but
Wow.
they were all, even those were learning experiences. I mean, I've got this book that's coming out called Think Like a Startup Founder. And it's me, uh, it's written in the first person, just like my personal memoir, but now it's about my startup life. And unlike a lot of people that write these books, I focused on, well, here's lessons learned from mistakes I made.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I cover all kinds of topics. But and I tell stories about what happened with this startup in this situation when I made this mistake. And that I believe, and I've gotten some feedback that says I may be right, is going to sort of get that lesson into people's heads better than if I said, well, you better do A and then B and then C. It's like, well, let me just tell you what happens if you don't. And that's
Hmm.
that's the approach that I took.
Yeah, that's amazing. Universal words of wisdom for all of us. And I'm so appreciative to get them directly from you, Jothy Rosenberg, a PhD computer scientist, author, entrepreneur, and of course, cancer survivor. It's been an honor to talk to you today. And again, as I mentioned, we were going to do this previously and we had a snafu, but here we are finally having an interview. And I'm so happy you're here. So thanks for being here today on Motivational Mondays.
Thank you so much, Corey. It was wonderful.